as you talk about those clear objectives and tying it to compensation, how do you do that? Because I imagine that there's so much resistance to that, right? So it's like you've got expectations now, and then what's the how do we make that happen?
Well, the resistance and the friction is going to come in from a couple of different places. The first place that individuals have to be ready to deal with friction and resistance is in just the way that the current system works.
Right.
Individuals are going to have their status quo bias. We have to anticipate that. That status quo bias is the reason why we acknowledge we may need to stop smoking or stop drinking or stop doing another vice, yet we keep doing it, right? And so the first step, and I hope that you would agree, because it is acknowledgement, it is acceptance, and then we can start to actualize change. But we have to lean into the ideology humbly that there is status quo that is going to create friction and naturally try to make us work within the current ways that we've been working. So the way we overcome that is we look at the current system that has produced a lot of unintended consequences, and we say that system isn't going to work. So when we go about making changes, those changes therefore cannot be in line or at the pace at which the current system allows. And so that's the first fallacy that we really have to get around and correct, is that this current management structure at different companies, the way that policies are written within different departments at different institutions, we can no longer say, well, the typical way is that we have a vote once a month in the board meeting and it has to wait. This is an urgent situation. Whatever rules need to be broken so that we can revolt to evolve, we have to do that. And that is the mindset that I'm challenging leaders to adopt. The second thing that we have to be mindful of is that leadership is not beholden only to individuals that have a title. The moment chooses the leader. And in this moment, there are a number of individuals that are ready to lead on the issue of race, ready to lead on the issue of diversity, that other leaders that have been around 20, 30, 40 years simply are not. And so we have to be truthful and ethical in understanding that we can't hold back people who are ready to lead right now on this issue just because other leaders are trying to catch up. The third thing that we have to be mindful of is the ethic of how we go about getting change. Because a group of non-Black, for instance, employees that are trying to force through an agenda around Black Lives Matter can only take it so far. I do not give permission to other individuals that are not Black to own my narrative or to try to portray the difficulty of what it's like to be Black in corporate America, Black in education, Black in society. There is no clue and no idea. And I'll give you an example of why. I spend a lot of time in talking about emotions and emotion states and branding through emotions, and have spent years cataloging a range of emotions and how we use communication and experiences and create a culture in order to tip the scale of a negative emotion to being more positive, and to make sure that that positive emotion is consistent throughout policies and practices and all points of interaction within a company, so that ultimately that purpose that a company has is backed up by all of the actions that are being manifest and all the practices and beliefs that are being upheld by managers and leaders on a regular basis. For a lot of Black people living in America, and I would say probably abroad also, and I've been to 20 different countries, and I pride myself on traveling and the level of cultural fluency that I have. But I'm going to speak specifically from the lens of Black Americans. Black Americans live in a fear culture. Every time a Black American, especially if you are a male, walks by a police officer, there is not the same level of relationship or belief system or even social contract that exists with someone who is white. If you are white, police to you are there to serve and protect. If you are Black, and if you are a Black male, police are a threat to your existence. And, you know, one statistic guided my career and the actions that I would take until I was in my mid 30s. I learned pretty early on that before a Black male turns 33, they have a 50% chance of being arrested. 50%. And a 50% chance of having an arrest record, right?
Wow.
And so when you think about a statistic that is so staggeringly high and against one group of individuals, that starts to change the way that you interact with the whole group of people, such as police, which are supposed to be there to serve and protect everyone.
Right.
And so the existence of Black Americans and white allies or allies of any other race is different. It is fundamentally different in America. The odds are different. How hard you have to work is different. The level of emotional burden and anxiety that is carried on a regular basis is different. And so this third point of ethics is incredibly important because it is a fallacy for white leaders, Asian leaders, or any leader that's not Black to think that they can be the voice of Black people. As someone who's a Black American and a leader, I'm telling you, you do not have my permission, and you likely don't have the permission of a lot of other people. What we want to see is more individuals that have the upbringing that we have had to represent us. And so it's more around, do you have a shared sense of struggle that we have had for the past couple of decades, that we have had as a people for hundreds of years? And in many regards, when people ask themselves that question objectively, as a leader, most leaders will have to answer no. They have not had that same experience. And we've gotten to a place in terms of civil rights, for instance, as it relates to other marginalized populations like women, where we have said a group of men should not make decisions about what women do with their bodies.
Right.
There should be women who are making that decision and part of that conversation. Yet at many companies, we are having conversations about race, and many leadership decisions are being made that have huge consequences, sometimes unknown and unintentional, that are not balanced because those leaders feel, in my opinion, arrogantly and egotistically, that they understand the complexities of what it means to be Black in America or in the world, and they are oversimplifying it without the permission of their Black executives and employees.
All right. I hear you. I hear you. So summarizing what you said is basically we get to seize this opportunity to act now to make systematic changes, and those changes get to be led by Black leaders, and that older leadership that is not Black can't assume that they know what's best, and to ethically move forward, you need to have representation of those folks that haven't been represented to make that change effective.
Absolutely. And I think that's true of any marginalized group. If we were trying to pass a new policy that was a parental leave policy or figure out how to better support parents in the workplace, can non-parents really create that policy? Or does it require actual parents to create that policy? And so I think when we look at other examples objectively, we start to find that for whatever reason, leaders think that when it comes to issues around being Black in America or Black in the corporate workplace, they have special exception and ability to make those decisions. That doesn't happen with women. That doesn't happen with parents. It doesn't happen with any other group except Black Americans. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the open letter on race, to make it very clear where leaders can be effective and where leaders cannot be effective. And that it's okay to empower other leaders that may not have traditionally gone through the same systematic pathway to become a leader. That system of maybe getting coaching, or that system of having an executive sponsor, or that system of doing a management training program. Those types of systems have historically failed to acknowledge Black employees. And that is why we have the lack of individuals at the top of organizations, because of all these micro steps that have failed. And so we have to acknowledge those micro steps are not working. And in doing so, look at the system and say, we can't fix things by working within a broken system. The same way you can't get dressed in the morning by looking at a mirror that all is broken glass. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, question for you. I see like a huge opportunity for outside consultancy. I mean, I hear what you're saying is to help elevate the voices of those within. Is it also possible to have like an outside consultancy come in to help make changes? Because a lot of folks, I feel like, are more open to outside voices than they are inside voices. And that may be part of what's broken, but curious about your perspective there.
Yeah, I would agree, Ben. That is part of that is part of what's broken. Because let's play that out, right? Let's say an executive team says, well, let's create some sense of objectivity and let's bring in a consultant. What they're in essence doing is they're sending two messages. First, they're sending a message that they have money because they're going to pay an outside company, and they'll rather pay an outside company than pay their employees that are already volunteering their time to serve on diversity councils, or to volunteer for resource groups, or to show up to meetings on top of all of their additional work that they have to do, in a way that white employees don't have to volunteer and show up for. It creates an unnecessary, uncompensated burden for employees to therefore give free work when they see outside parties and consultancies getting paid to say the same exact thing. The second thing it does, which has an unintended consequences, which at this stage is an intentional consequence, is that it prevents great leaders from within the organization from ascending. As soon as we sidestep the individuals that are at organizations and bring in outside consultants in order to be the voice of change, it assumes that the individuals within the organization are not qualified to do the same thing. And there are many people in an organization that are qualified and have put in the time and the work and have the track record in the history of getting change, of having the hiring practices that are trying to be modeled after, of assuming the cultural fluency within their team that every department and office or brand within a larger holding company should have and exhibit. And so we have to be very purposeful in making sure that employees are not being left behind and not being acknowledged through proper compensation because millions of dollars are being spent with external consultants. And secondly, that the voices internally are empowered.
Okay. So in other words, we're going to we can make sure the money goes to the right places, the right leaders are nurtured, and the probable actual like hard part of creating that systematic change from within is ultimately going to benefit the companies and those marginalized the most.
It benefits everyone. It benefits absolutely everyone. I'll give you an example. I am a history junkie, and I put this in the open letter on race. I've learned American history, world history, British history, European history. In college, I studied in Paris at Sorbonne and Dauphine. I've been to 20 different countries. I grew up until I was 5 in Germany. I understand the value of history. And when I look back at history, there are many lessons that we can learn. And the first lesson, and I won't go into all of them now, but this is the one that I want to particularly pay attention to, is what happens when you help the most marginalized group and how that lifts all of the other groups up at the same time. And one of the most marginalized groups in US history has been Black Americans. And so when we look at how Black Americans operate and how they work as a community, it's a community that is welcoming of everyone else. It's not a community that is exclusionary. And so often people say, well, if they want something, Black folks want something, it's a Black thing. But if you look back at the history of time, Black things have already been gifts to everyone else in regards to culture, such as music, with Elvis, in terms of, literature, in terms of sports, in terms of a number of different things. There's very few things that Black Americans have ever created that they've said, I alone can only be the benefactor of this. It is inherently a group of individuals that share and bring other people along the journey. However, I cannot say that same thing about many other groups. And objectively, with evidence, I make that claim. So when the NAACP was formed, for instance, it wasn't called the Organization of Black People. It was for the civil rights of Black people, but they intentionally and purposefully made it inclusive. And they made it about a lot of colored people. Now today, that ideology around what colored is has broadened, right? And so we think of colored as meaning Latinx. We think of it as also meaning individuals that are Asian, individuals that may be Middle Eastern. But that was not the original definition of what color means. When that word was used as a weapon in America on signs, in legislation, and quite broadly in conversation, in media and in news, it was used against Black people. And so we really have to give Black people credit for broadening and destigmatizing the notion of being colored and making it more inclusive for other individuals. And that started with the NAACP as an organization for colored people. And some of the founding members were not even Black individuals. Some of the founding members were individuals that were Jewish. And so when you look at the history of how Black Americans have achieved what they have so far, it has always been through the root ideology that you pull people up and bring other people along. And that is why we need more Black leaders in corporate America and beyond, because there is that instilled value that the journey is going to go much further when there are other people who come along on it. Other groups, however, do not believe that as their central theme. And they get empowered and they stop and they don't pull people up, and it hurts and harms Black Americans. It hurts and harms the Black Lives Matter movement, and it does not create more empathy. And I think we find ourselves at this moment in time where a lot of those people that got to a seat of power are now realizing the unintended consequences of them taking a seat at the table versus creating another seat at the table for someone else. And I think that's creating a sense of urgency and a call to action for all those people to say, I should have created another seat at the table rather than just sitting down.